All right. So chapter 5, white saviors proselytizing the pagans. There's nothing sort of controversial at all in this chapter.
Oh, please.
So we deal with missionaries, Indian boarding schools, and transracial adoption. So
Let's start with adoptions. How about
yeah,
that?
let's start with adoption.
Well, I mean,
Go for it. We can start with it.
I think about my Sarah Banfield, who was Bonnie's mentor. And Sarah now lives in Oregon, but she's
Right.
adopted 2 children.
Okay.
One from I think Dominican Republic. Is that right, Stephanie? Carlos?
I believe so. Yeah. Yeah.
And then she adopted a second little boy from India named Asher. And she said that she has really adopted them and she loves them. They're her children. And she's faced all the problems of having children of color. And the children have asked her, why do people hate us? And she's had to, I mean, it's really been a tough thing for her because she's not trying to bring them into being, she's teaching them what it's like to be, she's just adopting them as her sons. It's not about color with her, but the country makes it about color.
Mm.
All right. Well,
It was that we froze at the beginning.
what's that?
Hey, Stephanie, hey, Jim.
What'd you say, Melissa?
I was saying we froze and missed the beginning of that story. Who was it that adopted these children?
My daughter's mentor in confirmation classes.
Oh, okay.
She graduated from Piedmont, got her master's, and she now lives in Oregon, but she's taught on the reservation out in Arizona. She taught in Alaska on an island up there where most of the people, the kids are indigenous background. So she's got a lot of background in dealing with people who are of other backgrounds to teach them. And so she was not afraid to adopt children from outside, but she finds a lot of trouble, I think, in trying to raise them without, she embraces their cultures, basically.
Yeah.
and see,
Like
this
Russian,
We're not frozen, they are.
Hmm.
Choice.
I was going to say that the whole discussion, I was reading that, and
What seems like everybody.
Go ahead, Matthew.
they breaking up.
No, you're fine.
I was gonna say one of the reasons I wanted to start there was because Russell Moore is mentioned in there, which I haven't read that book. I'm assuming that's the same Russell Moore from the SBC.
Yeah, it is. Yeah.
I don't know, but the other thing I think about too is Barrett with her children, and I think I've seen somewhere where she adopted one from Haiti, right, and one from somewhere else, maybe 2 from Haiti. And I haven't dug into this because it was just through Twitter through all the
they're both from
confirmations.
Haiti.
Okay. But somebody mentioned on Twitter that she hasn't had a discussion with her kids about race and she didn't have it until after Floyd's murder. I don't know how old her kids are. Which I found kind of shocking, especially with kids from Haiti. But then the other one that comes to mind too is the woman who spoke, I think I mentioned this at the RNC, whoever was on the first night, the anti-abortion woman, who was basically like, I'm glad that my son gets profiled because he's black and my white kids don't. You know, they should get profiled because statistically they're more violent or whatever the crap she said. And of course, she's touting kind of these same things here that, you know, I'm making them better. It kind of seems like. Does that make sense? That's just what I was thinking about.
That is what missionaries think they're doing. Or,
Yeah.
You know, a lot of times it was go in and change the culture, put clothes on these people. They're naked, for goodness sakes. They wouldn't say for God's sake, by the way.
Yeah. Well,
I mean, don't you think that's what missionaries of the past did? But I mean, I really don't feel that that's what missionaries are like today any more than I feel like that's what Peace Corps is like today.
No, that,
Not all missionaries, no.
that
So-
really depends on the denomination, how the missionaries are.
I mean, clearly when we're talking about Sarah and we're saying, oh, she taught on the res and she taught on another res. And I
Yeah,
mean, that was a mission kind of oriented thing. So
but she
I
didn't
don't
try
think
to
we can
change
make,
them.
I don't
See,
think we can make wide generalizations from a few people either.
I kind of think, at least my interaction with Southern Baptist and mission seems to be that way.
Which way?
Yeah.
That it's more of, we got to change the culture.
Yeah, so,
And the reason I say that is I still haven't finished this book, but Jeremy Courtney's book about going to the mission field. And then he talks, and I don't know what denomination he was. He's the guy who started Preemptive Love, but he talks about going to the mission field. I think he went to Turkey or Lebanon. He went to predominantly Muslim countries, was witnessing or being missioned to Muslims basically, and talked about the whole process, which we know, of course, coming from SBC, that if you go to China, you have to say you're going for something else, all this type of stuff.
Mhm.
But he talks about getting in conflicts with his pastor back home about the fact that they seem to be so worried about quotas and, just doing these things and not building the relationships. Basically just saving people, changing them, and not building and helping, right? And that seems to be kind of what I think about when I think of missions too, because I told you about the Operation Christmas Child video last week, right? It's presenting Africa as totally poor and everybody without clothes, that they need our help. And they're the ones who are beating COVID.
yeah.
I'm one of them. So,
So I think, at least my experience when I was in the Congo, you see very different faces of Christianity in the developing world, depending on the denomination, even depending on the country. Not always the same. The same denomination can have a different face around their presentation towards how they deliver the message of the gospel to folks in foreign lands. So, and also I think that there's historic I think Jennifer's right in the one sense that historically all missionaries sort of functioned the same way. They basically, it wasn't just saving the soul, it was also saving the savage, which meant civilizing the savage and doing all that. And so today, there are lots of missionaries that are really more healthcare providers or food providers or clean water providers than they are actually concerned so much about the sort of delivering of the Christian message through preaching the Bible and that kind of stuff. But you go to the Congo today, I guarantee you will still find missionaries in the rainforest translating indigenous languages that don't have an alphabet and don't have a written or anything, just like they're talking about we did in Hawaii. And I want to talk a little bit about that Hawaii thing in a little bit. But anyway, and those missionaries are still there and they live in the rainforest for 10, 15, 20, 25 years, however long it takes to translate and create a written language. Then they teach the people to read, and then they write a Bible in that language. I mean, they do all this, but their objective is not just to save the soul. They also carry all this cultural baggage often that, they need to eradicate. Like, if they dance around the fire pit at the new moon, they have to get rid of all these things. So there's still lots of missionaries that engage in that kind of work. I mean, on the one hand, like Wycliffe, the Wycliffe Bible translators, which is one of the sort of global Bible translators and people all over the world. I mean, what's impressive about them is the fact that they go and live in these remote lands for decades to do this.
Mhm.
What's sad about it is they still carry this sort of white savior mentality. And I think that's what the book is trying to, I mean, obviously they're mostly using historical examples here, but these are still real in certain Christian contexts. So while I think Jennifer's right that a lot of churches have evolved away from that, it's not universal. And it also even depends on nationalities. I mean, when I was in the Congo, the American brethren were way more theologically conservative than their European counterparts.
Right.
And so even that sort of, even though they were from the same denomination and had the same theological sort of impetus for being missionaries, the European ones were more liberal around a lot of social issues, for example, than the American ones were. And so it still is sort of a true thing. But I want to look more, it seems how Matthew started with this sort of adoption thing. What are the authors trying to raise up with this notion of transracial adoption? Because probably all of us can find good examples of people that have adopted kids from other countries or just kids from a different racial background and have tried to make the child aware of their culture and all of that. But, what are the authors trying to get at with the sort of notion of transracial adoption?
Okay, so do y'all know that Josh is adopted? We adopted him after 4 years in foster care. He is white, he looks like us. People don't know he's adopted. Adoption in this country really is only about 3% of the people, so it's far less than you think it is.
Sure.
It's only the transnational adoption that even gets recorded a lot of the time. So obviously Jim and I have some real issues with some of this kind of stuff. Not so much transracially. Both Josh and the other little girl we had for 4 years were white, and we didn't have any issues there. There's no, again, I don't think that the authors maybe have done real recent background work, because when you adopt in this country, they very much are, you don't get to choose the color of the children you'll take. I mean, you take who comes. You do get to specialize in certain age groups, so that most
Or
people
medical needs.
yeah. So Jim and I specialized in medically needy children. But people, you don't get to say, oh, I don't want that child because they're Black. You
Right.
take what they give you.
You get a phone call when the kid shows up
Yeah.
3 hours later.
Usually about 3:00 in the morning, and the kid comes with a trash bag of whatever they own. And that same call may happen 3 or 4 years later, and they take that child with whatever they own. So we have kind of a different take on it, I think, than people might. I am actually against transnational adoption, even though I know really wonderful people who have.
Yeah.
In part because there are many children in this country who need families and don't have them.
Sure.
There's-
And it's that risk of that child being removed from you that keeps people from doing that. I do think that in the case that the very specific cases that they are talking about, most of those children are not really orphans in the strictest sense of the word. They have mothers often who are single, who are not allowed to take care of them in those cultures. And that is a big problem. We've certainly seen that with a lot of the celebrity adoption that has happened. And so we have some real dynamic there as far as that goes. But I think what they're trying to say, honestly, is that if you are not being sensitive to wherever your child came from, it doesn't really matter if they came from across the county in a trailer, or if they came from the ghetto in Atlanta, or if they came from Ethiopia. You have to be sensitive to where your child came from. And that is part of what they talk about in Real Parents, Real Children, which is a book that I have read. But it's also what they teach you when you are going to be an adoptive parent now. It may not be what they taught. I mean, when they're talking about adopting out of the Korean War, for crying out loud, the Korean War was 70 years ago. So, you know,
Things have changed a lot.
things have
since then.
changed a bunch in the past 70 years. But
Although
when you're-
I do think one of the authors actually has adopted
Yes.
children.
Yeah.
like-
Yes,
yeah, oh yeah, definitely.
yes.
But you know, I mean, like Stephanie and I, our dad was in Korea. I think you're making some assumptions when you suggest that, you know, there's, you know, white Christian men that went to Korea and did whatever with Asian women. I mean, our dad's not a Christian.
Yeah.
So obviously non-Christian men also did, and Black men also did. So I think that there's some assumptions made.
Well,
Yeah.
MASH addressed that, so.
You what?
I said MASH addressed that too, by the way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Program MASH, it actually did address that.
Yeah.
That problem. That,
Yeah.
And the fact that the children who came from those unions were often rejected by everyone.
By both.
Yeah.
Yeah.
In
Yes.
Vietnam too.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, it was big there.
One quick thing, just a side note, you mentioned about children coming with the trash bags, and I sent this to Tim if y'all want it, but there's a professor at Auburn who I didn't know that she was in foster care, and I think she was adopted, but her and somebody else, there was a fly, sorry.
Oh, no, it was
This is
my
head.
laser's
But she started a thing, I think it's called the Luggage Project, if I remember correctly, but basically it's getting actually hard luggage instead of a trash
Yeah.
bag and sending,
Yep.
and sending materials and supplies. So if y'all want that link, Tim can maybe send it to you. I think I sent it to him.
For foster
Yeah.
children.
Yeah, we actually have done the luggage thing in the past. While we were foster parents, and we are not anymore. That has been, I mean, we too,
I'm too old.
again, we're talking about 20 years ago. So I know what it was like 20 years ago. I know what it was like 10 years ago when we re-upped our certification, but we have not taken any children in that interim for a lot of different reasons. But among the things that they would have us do, even if you only had a child for a weekend, if they came with nothing, the very first thing you were supposed to do was go out and buy them a
Get
piece
them
of
clothes
luggage.
and luggage. Yeah.
and you know, and some other sundry items that you knew you were sending them off with. That was
Yeah.
a very normal
We had a few
thing.
kids that were transitional kids between
here
us
in group
and a
homes.
group home because they'd aged out of foster care almost. We had a couple of kids that were just, we know somebody who wants them as their foster kid, but they can't take them until they do this, and this first. And so we'd have them for a few weeks maybe. So, you know, the tough part is, you know, we had one kid who was just a transitional boy, and he spent the weekend with us, and
heading to a group home because he had done something really awful
Right.
at his previous home.
and you know, he was like, well, where am I going?
It was really terrible.
You know,
it was
I
the most
mean,
awful thing.
It was just bring tears to your eyes. He was a perfect kid while he was here, but you know, they cautioned us because we had other children in the home at the time, and Ryan just happened to be home, and he'd gone through the classes when Josh was little, and they said, we'll pay you if you'll watch him for
Yeah.
the weekend. And so, you know, and then Monday morning comes and we're all getting him ready to go, and he says, well, why do I have to leave? I like it
It's
here.
really awful.
And it was just
Oh,
horrible.
Yeah.
Oh,
But that being said,
that was
for-
that was part of a. I'm sorry, that was part of a movie I watched from the 50s. Not too long ago. It was a Cary Grant movie, and it was exactly that describes the scene exactly. Problem child who did not want to leave,
Yeah.
who was perfectly
Yeah.
comfortable in that household and did not want
it
to
was,
leave.
yeah, it was very sad. and that is one of the things. I mean, you do get paid to be a foster parent. You, if the circumstances are right, you may also get paid when you adopt, which we
did
adopted
not.
privately, and we actually have an open adoption, which is really a totally different situation.
So much more fun.
But we, you know, that is one of the things. If you adopt a brown child, you get paid 3 times as much
Yeah,
as if you adopt a white child,
literally, we
so-
know
so-
people who have not adopt, well,
fostered or
Fostered
adopted. Yeah.
or adopted Black or brown children, and especially those with a medical necessity, one of them could retire
Yeah.
on working because they were making more doing that
Oh,
than
much
they
more.
were doing at a job.
So were these people doing it because of the money?
Oh, some of them are.
You definitely find people who do that because of the money. Absolutely, 100%. You may find, especially when you hear those beautiful Reader's Digest stories, like, oh, these people adopted 20 special needs kids, right? Those people are making like $35,000 a month doing that.
Yeah.
Now when you, but we also know people who did it as part of a proselytizing, you know,
Mhm.
oh, as Christians, we need to do this.
We can't have children, so we're gonna just adopt
Well,
all these
or like
children.
Karen and John,
They
they had children who were
children,
grown
and then
up.
they started
But
having other
you know,
kids.
it's our mission from God to do this.
Yep.
Right.
I mean, you will see it on both sides, and sometimes it is absolutely that white savior syndrome, where you have people who are saying, in fact, like the program that comes out of the Ukraine right now, you have to be a member of a certain kind of church in order to do the summer program out of the Ukraine, and that's 100% trying to match older children with families that are mostly Baptist or Pentecostal.
Right. And I think that kind of example is also what they're talking about in the book. You know.
Well,
Absolutely.
so I don't know what your social media following looks like, but I noticed in, you know, probably the last 10 years or so, you know, you've gotten a lot of mommy bloggers and
Oh, yeah.
then moved on to Instagram influencers who seem to be adopting, you know, internationally for all of the wrong reasons.
Mhm.
That's talking points.
So you
Yeah.
saw the woman who returned her child.
Yes, I was gonna do
Oh,
that.
God,
You-
help.
you
You're gonna return your child?
She rehomed him like
Yeah.
he's some
Yeah,
pet.
Yeah.
Like,
It's like a
yeah,
puppy.
yeah,
like
yeah.
a bad puppy.
Actually, that's one of the reasons that adoptive parents hate it when people who are talking about animals talk about adopting them as though they've made them their progeny. But we, you know, that's just one of those talking points that irritates us.
What happened
But-
with the story?
She adopted a
Yeah. He was Asian.
I can't remember, and he had some, I think he was autistic.
Yeah,
um,
definitely a special needs.
Yes, and they
Yeah.
got him home, and I don't know how long they had him, maybe 6 months.
Yeah,
Yeah.
6 months, I think it was, yeah.
And then they decided they just couldn't handle him, so they
Yeah.
rehomed him. That was their wording.
Yeah, they actually did it very unofficially. They found a friend who wanted this child and gave him
Put him on
to
the
the
plane.
friends. Well, they gave that. You're thinking of someone else who returned her kid. She literally, that was a Russian
Yeah.
adoption.
Okay,
That
yeah,
woman and then that's part of why those countries closed, quite frankly, because she put
She
that
put him
kid
on a
on a
plane.
plane and sent him back to Russia on a one-way ticket.
Yeah.
No.
That kid was about 10 years old. This little boy was maybe only, I don't know, 3 or
Like
4.
a toddler.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I mean, what you're describing there basically sounds like a bill of sale.
Oh
You
yeah,
know?
absolutely, 100%.
Yeah.
And I
That's
do,
that's what it sounds like.
yeah,
Yeah.
Slave
I
for their
do think
Instagram.
early adoptions did used to be much more like that. I mean, you still see people a lot who were adopted by a family member, especially aunts and uncles who couldn't have kids. That's not even uncommon with people in their 30s.
Right.
Well, I mean, I know on your feed, you have like, I know at least 2 people who have done a lot of foster care, and aren't they working to adopt?
Yeah, we have 2 friends that have adopted through foster care, but
Mhm.
they're genuine. Like these were long-term foster
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
placements, and it just naturally fell into place.
Yeah,
Like,
and that's the same. I think I mentioned before, but I mean, you know, Joe at the library, Tim, but you know, him and Guillermo, same thing.
Right.
They have 2 pairs of siblings. Actually, they just started fostering another.
Wow.
Um,
Right. But even with domestic adoption or foster care adoption or open adoption, all of these things that are intended to mitigate some of the situation that they're talking about. I mean, kids who are fostered and kids who are adopted do have a hole that other kids do not have. They have started in a place that is way behind every other child
Right.
because every other child is wanted normally by at least one parent. And there is damage there that will not be repaired no matter where they came from. But when you take them out of their culture and with no intention of ever returning them to that culture, you are taking away everything that they were.
You're
You know,
civilized.
giving them a different name, a white name.
Right.
Now, like Joyce was saying, Sarah, she gave her children names that were ethnic.
Right.
I'm sure that her intention is to take them back there someday. Not necessarily to meet birth families or be with birth families, although she might, you know.
I mean, that's true orphans.
I think Carlos has some siblings, definitely, and a foster parent and stuff there, definitely.
Yeah, I know he has foster.
Yeah, and he may even have one parent alive, but and Asher may, but that's not how it works with orphanages in India.
Right.
You know, they get turned over to the orphanage and that's it. But the issue there is, even if those children go looking for their families, it's very hard for them to find them.
There's not much of a paper trail,
Yeah.
that's for sure. I mean, even with a foster child adoption, there's not a lot. It's hard to get the records opened enough so that you could even figure out who the birth parents were.
Oh yeah, like Josh's birth certificate is reissued with our names as though I delivered him in the hospital
Right.
in Royston.
Right.
It doesn't indicate in any way, shape, or form that he's adopted. And we've had a terrible time with him going to college, trying to get the, even though we had him the whole time, trying to get the records from his vaccinations under his dead name.
Right. Well, there you go. Matthew, you started us
So
off.
they could change, they put your name on the birth certificate, but they couldn't change.
Because the original birth certificate was,
Wait, what stuff?
Yeah, Jennifer, so they put your name on the birth certificate, but they didn't change his name?
No,
they
they
changed
changed his name. I mean, we left his name Josh.
Yeah, but it wasn't spelled as Josh or Joshua on the birth certificate, right?
Right. His name on his first birth certificate was misspelled. We told them immediately when we saw it that it was misspelled and they had a certain amount of time to fix it. They
Right.
chose not to fix it. So actually Josh's birth name is Joshus, like Jesus and Josh together. And he knows all this. He, like, I know he's looking at me and rolling his eyes. But yeah, obviously they changed his name to Joshua Elliott when we adopted him.
so he
I
was.
love watching Joyce. Her facial expressions this whole time are
Sorry, I can't control my expressions.
I did want to you know, thank you, Matthew, for opening up this conversation this way tonight. But I wanted to talk a little bit about the missionaries that went to
Yeah.
Hawaii. Mostly because, you know, if you don't know this history, and Matthew and Melissa might not know it, that the missionaries that they're talking about that went to Hawaii and created the original alphabet came from Boston. And they were part of the American, the official name was the American Board of Commissioners for Foreign Missions, because at that point, obviously, Hawaii was a foreign nation. But that was founded by Presbyterians, Congregationalists, and the Dutch Reformed Church of America in 1810 in New England. And so a ship left Boston Harbor with 14 missionaries, 7 husbands, 7 men, and 7 women, and 4 Hawaiian boys. And Hiram Bingham was the chief missionary, if you will. And they got to Hawaii after sailing for 167 days. That must have been a brutal trip. Anyway, they got there and they established, you know, the first Christian mission in Hawaii. And it was these Congregationalist and Presbyterian and Dutch missionaries. And they're the ones that wrote the first Bible as well in Hawaiian. And I discovered we can buy a first edition copy of that Bible
Oh, cool.
Really?
for only $6,500.
That's a good 65.
I'm sure that'll go through
It
the
seems
board
like a
real
steal,
easy.
but-
You think Alta would buy that?
I think I'm gonna.
We could
I
pair it
think
with
I'm
our
gonna-
Salvador Dali Bible.
Yeah, there you go.
Yes.
See how much left is,
Yeah.
how much supply money I have left in my budget at the end of the year.
Yeah, there you
It's a
go.
good idea, Tim.
How much is the Salvador Dali Bible? I haven't even heard of that one.
Come on up to the church and I'll show you the Salvador Dali Bible.
Something to
It's
see.
illustrated by Salvador Dali. It's really
Yeah,
funky.
I assume.
Yeah.
So we need that. We need the Jefferson Bible,
Oh, yeah.
Lion Bible.
We do.
They're almost free now.
I mean, Jefferson Bible, you can get online.
We need
I have
the
a,
Patriot Bible.
I actually have a ebook version of the Jefferson.
Well,
Bible.
we need hard copies. The Patriot Bible.
No, we need the hard copy of the Patriot Bible.
I'm assuming. I mean, I did research on the Cherokee. I'm assuming there's a Cherokee Bible because
Oh, yeah. There is. Mhm.
Yeah, I
Well,
mean,
not the Cherokee written language. I mean,
Yeah.
that's another instance of course, creating a language, even though Sequoia did it to become civilized.
Right.
in
All of those instances.
part of the problem with the legacy of the, you know, American Missionary Board that went to Hawaii is, you know, if they point out in the book, then they began to outlaw hula dancing. You know, they sent the royal family to the school to teach the kids all these sort of civilized behaviors. You know, and they basically eradicated, aside from the Hawaiian language, they eradicated almost all of the culture to make them Christian, you know, and now Hawaii is, you know, in this renaissance to try to recover all that, just like many Native Americans in the mainland are in that same kind of renaissance, you know, because the same thing, you know, when they talk about that Carlisle school that they talk about, the first Native American boarding school, you know, that's in Carlisle, Pennsylvania. I used to live 20 miles or so from that, you know, and there, Dickinson College is Carlisle. But that's where there's a war college in Carlisle, and there's a big military depot there. It's all part of that same school that they're talking about. I mean, the Indian boarding school is long since gone, but all the military stuff is still there in Carlisle.
Well, you know, the thing was with the Cherokees, they thought that by developing their language, having an alphabet, having their newspaper, that it would stop, because they were civilized,
Right.
Right.
it would
Right.
stop them from being moved.
Yeah, deported.
But the whites were more intent on having their property,
Right.
and so they were forced out. And I think about, I don't know, I'm of an age, and I don't know if anybody else is, but I remember
We
the
all are,
song.
Joyce.
Yeah, I remember the song Cherokee Nation by Paul Revere and the Raiders.
Sure, yeah.
And it talked about uh, you taught your English to our young. You basically destroyed our way of life,
Right,
our culture.
right.
And then someday the Cherokee Nation will return. But the point is that, that was something that, we have to change these savages, these natives. We've got to teach them better ways to live so that they will embrace our English, our language, our way of being, and not be savages anymore.
So I remember this. I didn't know these connections. You know that Boudinot, Elias Boudinot, and John Ridge, they were both Cherokee, and they went to the Foreign Mission School in Cornwall, Connecticut. And the Foreign Mission School was 1817 through 1826, and it was started by the American Board of Commissioners for Foreign Missions.
Right, yeah.
Wow.
And the reason that school closed down, because that's where they went, and of course that's where they received their Indian schooling, their civilization.
Right, exactly.
Because John Ridge married a white woman, I think, or was dating one, and Boudinot too, Harriet Gold, and they shut it down because of those interracial relationships.
Right.
So there's a really good book with the letters between Harriet and Elias, and she talks about seeing them burn her in effigy outside of her window.
Wow.
So
Well, when
I
I
think-
was,
Go ahead.
sorry. No, I was gonna say, when I was in college, reading through this, I didn't realize, I hadn't really stopped to think about how mission work is done, in the US or even in Hawaii, how it was done initially. But when I was in college, I went for the summer. The Southern Baptist Convention does every
Summer
state
missionaries.
does summer missionaries, the students. And so I signed up to go, and I went to Colorado, and one of the church that I was working with, every summer it was something they always did. And so I just tagged along, very much now feeling like I was there. It was like poverty tourism kind of,
Yeah.
but we spent a week on a Navajo Indian reservation doing vacation Bible school. And they also brought a bunch of school supplies for the kids that they had gathered and some different donations like that. But I feel like, part of me kind of, I don't know how I felt about that whole experience, because it was much more, I feel like I got more out of it, just eye-opening for that age of realizing what we had done to the Native Americans. And, the land is terrible. It was just all dirt. There's this church was the only thing with electricity on the entire reservation.
Wow.
The only running water was out of a faucet on the side of the church. But I also appreciated the church that I went with, because we didn't pull the white privilege card, in that they made us sleep on the floor. They made us use the outhouse. We didn't get showers all week. And it was like, you're going and you're not any better than them. You're going to live like they live. And then, at the end, they were also like, this is their culture, and we have to be respectful of that. And like the last day they cooked for us instead of us cooking for them. And they were like, you're going to eat it. And, cut that kind of thing. So,
Yeah, you have to eat this fry bread. What a terrible thing.
yeah, I mean, it wasn't hard to eat,
Yeah.
but because Navajo is like the Southwestern, so it was like, oh, this is good, but so I appreciate reading this, that church was, respectful of trying to go in to teach Jesus without trying to change who they were and their culture. But at the same time, it did kind of feel a little like the whole poverty tourism you see
I mean,
with
that's
people going
how-
on missions trips.
That's how my
too.
like youth trips to Galveston felt. I mean, Galveston and Matamoros in Mexico and all that.
Mhm.
Anyways.
Yeah. I think this shows that the road to hell is paved with good intentions.
Yeah,
You know,
Right?
right? I mean, I'm sure I really
It's also very
believe
broad.
that, yeah, I really believe that most of the people who were missionaries and most of the people even who were teachers at the Indian school. I mean, I've been to Carlisle too on several occasions. It's not far from where we're from.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, but you know, we would, you can see that originally the thought was we're going to make a, you know, make the Indian have what we have. The problem was that that's the same thing as like sequestering people with developmental delays in institutions.
Sure,
We did it to put them away from us or for our convenience,
right.
not because we were really helping. So, you know, I feel like they did some good. They really did. And in fact, they started kind of a trans tribal Indian, which came out later on with like Occupation Alcatraz and good things there. But they did some horrible things too. I mean, it's hard to understand. Looking back, you can see it perfectly.
Right. Yeah. Well, of course. I mean, you know, hindsight is 2020,
Right.
and
for real.
and we can also judge it with sort of some, you know, we have enough
Distance.
distance that, you know, we can sort of absolve ourselves from some responsibility.
So,
right?
so that thing you said about the good intentions, I decided to look up the we were talking about this before you came in, but the Southern Baptist Theological Seminary statement, and it is Albert Mueller Joyce, but this is what he said. Your comment just reminded me of that. Dealing with such challenges as renaming and reconciling and reparations and all that for Southern Baptist Theological Seminaries past. Dealing with such a challenge means recognizing both, and this is his quote, the burden of history and the blessings of heritage.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Oh my
Can I just throw up right now?
God.
I just want to see your expression. 'Cause it's-
Yeah, I'm sorry. That's precisely why I don't keep up with Southern anymore.
yeah.
You're making her mad.
There's so many of us. I mean,
I'm not
seriously,
trying.
there's so many of us around here and throughout the Southern Baptist Convention. I mean, through the National Association, and our executive secretary, he'll be retiring this year, went to seminary with me. And we're just appalled by what's happened. I mean, we went through that, and we had the great professors who taught us and who refused to be indoctrinated. And that was the whole thing back then. I mean, it was horrible that we had such great professors and people who taught us, who educated us and didn't indoctrinate us.
Well, I mean, but that's the whole free church.
And that's Muller's thing. And that's the fundamentalist thing.
Yeah, but I mean, Joyce, what you're talking about is the whole free church tradition and the whole sort of, you know, Anabaptist tradition. I mean, they were antithetical to all of that, you know, sort of indoctrination. And so.
You'd think. Well, I still remember, I'll say this is kind of an aside. My theology professor was Dr. Dale Moody. I took him for one course, I took Wayne Ward for another. But Dr. Dale Moody was caught up in this whole fight with the Southern Baptist Convention over his argument that Paul said that that Christianity was about perseverance in the faith. And they accused him of fighting against the Southern Baptist belief in once saved, always saved.
Yeah.
And they burned his book in Oklahoma and other places. And they came to preach a revival at our seminary. And I will never forget that on October 31st in seminary, in our chapel, Dr. Moody stood up in front of the whole, he was preaching that day. And he stood up and he said, he quoted Martin Luther, and he said, and he used the German part, but he said, here I stand, I can do no other.
Yeah.
And slammed the Bible down on the pulpit. And he said, I will not sign your Baptist faith and message. Baptists do not sign a doctrine.
Right.
And that became a fight. That became fighting words when the Criswells and all that group arrived the next day.
I just need to sit with you and have coffee so I can learn all this.
Do what?
I just need to have a drink with you to learn all this.
He said coffee.
Welcome time.
He said coffee the first time.
And then he
Do
changed
what?
it to a drink, so he was making it more broad depending on the time.
Speaking of which,
Well, we could always meet over at Temperance. That's a safe place.
Or you could just meet in my office and have coffee there.
Yeah,
Or
that's a safe drink.
or a drink, you know.
Yeah.
What you know, I would have to, you know, if I was the, you know, Harry Buttman professor of religion, you know, I would have a bottle of scotch in my desk, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Because Harry enjoyed his scotch. So I remind James of that sometimes, and he reminds me that I don't have that title. So
Well, here's a point that I grew up with. At some point, I heard that on my maternal grandfather's side, that we were part Cherokee. And I remember my grandmother absolutely say, that is not true. It's not true. And then later, one of my first cousins on that side was doing our family heritage, our family tree. And his mother, who was my mother's twin sister, said, yes, it is. And my mother said, it's not.
yeah.
And then we were at a family reunion, and it was the Fordham, Bailey, whatever, y'all don't care about that. But anyway, there was a picture of my great grandmother when she was young, and her name was Tallulah. And I said something to my mother about her name. I said, well, did they really know it was Tallulah Bankhead that admired, or at that point, or whatever? And my mother looked at me and she was just furious. And she said, it's an Indian name, get over it.
No.
And there's a picture of my grandparents, my great-grandparents. And there's this lady in the picture who's rather grizzled looking, you know, she's dark skinned. And my mother insisted on calling her telling us she was somebody else. And her twin sister, my Aunt Willette, looked at it and told us, your mother Winnell just had some strange ideas. That was your great-grandmother.
Oh, interesting.
She was dark skinned. She was a Native American. And my mother was just adamant that we had no.
You were first family of Virginia.
Huh?
You were a first family of Virginia. You had no tainting whatsoever.
Exactly.
But my mom's the exact opposite. I think she claims to be part Cherokee and isn't.
My dad's is different.
Well, your
Oh,
dad, I
the
can see-
Elizabeth Warren
No,
Black
he's not.
Gambit.
You sure?
My cousin had a DNA test thing done, and there was no
Okay.
Cherokee
Well, you didn't tell me that.
at all.
Yeah. Josh had an anthropology professor a couple of years ago who said, you know, that the Cherokee were the most prolific people on the planet, which is why almost 80% of all Americans say that they are part Cherokee.
Interesting.
So-
I don't say that.
No, you say you're part Iroquois, just like I do.
I don't say that either.
Oh, you're part of the 5 tribes.
Exactly.
But you know, the fact was is that it
Part
was
of
so
the
denied.
tribe.
Yeah.
Oh no, I agree with you, Joyce. It's the point that your family would deny it in a way to say, you know,
When
no,
there's evidence.
absolutely not. Under no circumstances are those people among us. Which is, you know, I think that that's a really hard thing. I mean, when Stephanie and I not too long ago got the backstory on our one great grandmother being Jewish, our dad, who's not related at all, was like, oh no, you girls are not Jewish, that's ridiculous. Well, I mean, hello. So you know, I mean, but he said that's just ridiculous, why do you want to be Jewish? It was, we don't want to be Jewish. It's like, why wouldn't we just be who we are?
Right, exactly.
And I
See,
think that's
even white families
Have black
have
sheep.
well, but our culture has been messed with too. You're not an Indian, yes you are.
Yeah,
You're not Scottish, yes you are.
yeah,
You're not Irish, you're not Catholic, you're not this.
yeah.
It's
I mean,
not
It's
just
all about hiding
hiding
whatever
what we
makes you different.
right.
Yeah, sure.
I mean,
and
that's part of what whiteness is, right? Is
Yeah.
hiding
Yeah.
Exactly.
to make you seem white. But then even what you said too about the black sheep, I know that was a joke, but I mean, if you really look at it, the interactions that people have with one another, it's true.
Yeah.
I mean, there's no way, you'd have to dig into your own past to see if it's you, but there was so much interaction, one either consensual or non-consensual, that occurred.
Yeah.
Mhm.
I know my grandmother, but like way before she got sick, she's been dead for like 12 years.
Did you ever find those cats?
Stop. She was doing some genealogy stuff, and my mom said she quit when she found an African American in the
Oh yeah.
Really, that's interesting.
you know, and I was just like, why'd you stop? I'm interested in, you
Yeah.
know.
Right, yeah.
And you know, I don't think she kept, like, I can't find it, you know, but nobody has like her work. So I'm like, I'm interested in that.
Maybe we should go back on that website we were using.
If you go on Ancestry, they might have stuff. They have
You have to pay for that. don't
no. There's a
Well,
free section on that.
There's a free one. There's a
you? As
free
I
one.
said, I'm Jewish. I'm not paying for it.
Ah,
No,
So
she's
there-
Scottish
there-
first, and that's why she's not paying for it.
There is a free one from the it's actually the Church of Latter-day Saints that have it. You have to
exactly.
Yeah, that's because they want to make you a Mormon eventually.
You know,
Well,
they can make people Mormons after they're dead.
there is a thing on there that says, are you a CLD or whatever, you know, member? But I think it's called Family Tree. But the other thing too, Tim, you know that through Piedmont we have access to Ancestry.
Well,
Really?
I already have an Ancestry account, so.
Yeah. So Mackenzie told me we have access to Ancestry through the university.
Well,
Yeah.
we need to get on that.
But the Family
Years
Tree
ago-
app is pretty good. I mean,
Years ago, I was
learned
on
back-
Ancestry
back to
and-
the 1500s.
I had people contacting my Ancestry account. Did you know? Were you related to this Wales Halsey from New
Yeah.
Bedford?
Yeah.
And that's how they were tying the
Wait.
names back to Wales and Scotland.
That name's familiar. Are we related?
Could be.
Well, here's the thing. When
We're both
when we
pretty
were in
clear.
Salt Lake City, when we were in Salt Lake City, I went to the library and worked on, you know, check my family tree. And I was tracking back through something, and I said, "This is incorrect." And the person looked at me and she said, "How do you know?" I said, "I'm his granddaughter." And they said, she looked at me and she said, well, correct it. And I looked at her and she said, all you have to put in there is, you know better because you're his granddaughter. And so I did, and I changed some stuff in that whole thing because I knew the family history at that point. Because, I mean, my God, I've got the Ferguson family Bible all the way back from Scotland.
Wow.
I mean, it's,
Impressive.
you know, but you find things, and then you think about the people whose whole cultures have been eradicated. They can't trace their families
Sure.
because it was done away with by the settlers.
Whatever.
Right. Yeah.
Our settlers, families, whatever, they were ashamed of, oh, you came from Ireland, and the Irish were just anathema.
Right.
And that was another group that was just, I mean, I remember daddy embraced the Kennedys. And I later understood because John Fitzgerald Kennedy and our original name, the Gerald name, was originally Fitzgerald.
Ah.
And daddy embraced that because that was the Irish coming back
Sure.
and being recognized. But you don't recognize that or believe that because we're looking at whites now at that point, but it's different cultures are often eradicated or pushed down because they don't meet the standard or because they pose a threat to the people in power.
Right.
And those of color really pose a threat
Mhm.
because they can't possibly be as good as.
Right. Well, and Jennifer's point about, finding the Jewish ancestry. I mean,
Exactly.
think of all the immigrants that came from Eastern Europe and Central Europe that, anglicized their name when they got to Ellis Island or whatever. Because
Family.
Yeah, that is literally what happened to us. When that family came, first they came from Russia because crap was bad there. They went to Germany. Oh, stuff got real bad there. But they got out before they got out before
36.
well, actually, I think they got out right in between, would have been in between World War I and World War II. And they came with German names. They came with Schaefer as their name because they wanted to hide that they were even Jewish.
Wait, did you say Schaefer?
Schaefer, yeah.
When did they come?
I think they would have come in about 1924.
Okay,
1924, 1925.
so my grandmother's
Schaefer.
maiden Schaefer, but they were here before that.
Yeah.
But they did come from Germany. So they came from Germany. And
So we're related.
Yeah. Good
Maybe.
luck. Yeah. And then, well, at least we pretended we were you. Because we were definitely Russians to start with. And then,
and
and
Jewish.
then and Jewish. And then they moved to this very small town in upstate New York and became Seventh-day Baptists so that they could practice the old law, but under the idea that they were Christians.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah. Very.
And see, Seventh-day Baptist was new to me. I'd never heard of Seventh-day Baptist
Yeah.
until Jen told
We're a teeny little group.
Jennifer, are they thinking about leaving America now because of the current political situation?
Maybe.
In Europe?
Well,
'Cause it seems
all
more
10 of
safe
us.
there now. Less dangerous.
Yeah, exactly.
So,
Well, there was a lady who came to our church for a long time or for a while, and she was Jewish. And one Sunday I mentioned Fiddler on the Roof because I was talking about tradition. And of course, my daughter loved that movie, and I loved the play, but she loved the movie and she watched it over and over when she was 4 years old. But this person, this lady, her family came from Russian Jews, and she actually told the story of how her family went to Israel, escaped to Israel,
Wow.
and then across because of the pogroms that were
Right.
held in Russia,
Yeah.
and how some of her family members, that the story actually ended up being based on some of her family.
Huh.
Yeah.
And it was very amazing to listen to her tell the story of how that was real. So real that we thought it was a musical.
Right.
But to people who escaped from that, it was very real. It was based on reality. So, I mean, whether you're talking Jewish or Jews or Native Americans, or there are groups that have been, their culture has been overtaken and they have been punished for who they are.
Sure.
I'm looking back at. I'm looking at Family Tree. Y'all got me going back.
Yeah.
It traces back to like the 1500s.
Well, I have a question, bringing it back to the
The book?
the book.
Oh, well,
So
yeah.
what is this discussion?
What were we talking about?
Happy Family Tree.
Actually, this is going back to the 1300s.
All right.
What? But it says in here that we should look to movements that embody instead of misappropriate the humility of Jesus in the first century. So I'm always looking to align myself with organizations and companies that are, doing that. So I was just curious who y'all know that are doing it right.
In the community.
Yeah, in the community or even
I've told you a few.
Yeah.
Well, one thing like Josh participated several years, and that was a Southern Baptist thing, although the Methodist churches certainly participated too, in Merge, which is a very local missionary. They send kids out to fix older people's houses. I mean, Josh re-roofed a house. They send
Well, not
people
by
to
himself.
not by himself. That would be awesome. It was also in
If that
July.
was true, he'd be up working on something tomorrow.
But they built handicap ramps for people who needed them. They went out and around in the community and just did the work that needed to be done. There was no proselytizing. I mean, the kids certainly had religious elements that were done in their like day one convention and then maybe some devotionals, but it wasn't about that. It was just simply about finding a need and serving the need.
Right.
And I remember one year in the National Association, we were at the adult conference, and the kids our youth and college age kids were in the Dakotas.
Mhm.
And they were not proselytizing. They were simply working in the communities, trying to create better conditions for people. And one of the youth leaders with the kids streamed through to the adults, and they were crying because they come across a person whose home had no roof. And she couldn't afford to do a roof. They were trying to put a ramp up, but what was the point in a ramp if they didn't have a roof? And where were the adults? And they appealed to us and said, we need this much money to put a roof on this house. And it became a big thing where the adults gave the money immediately, pledged all that money and gave it to put a roof on this lady's house so that she and her kids would have a safe place to live. And this was on one of the reservations. But it wasn't about, we're trying to make these people better. We're not trying to make them us. It was simply, we're trying to make their life better. And we're trying to provide them this. And I think that was a good example.
And isn't there like the Rose Ministry in Atlanta, I think is a really good ministry that works with sex workers in Atlanta. There's no judgment. It's not about that. It's just
Yeah.
making people feel like they're valid. You know?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Or the kids whose families have kicked them out because they're homosexual.
Right.
And there are groups that take them in and provide them with clothing and homes.
Yeah. Rainbow House.
Rainbow.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right, it's like almost 9 o'clock, so
Oh, good.
that exactly.
It's turned into pumpkins.
Well, some of us might, or
You're
something.
making me miss the Braves winning game 2. So
Oh, I'm so sorry, but we're
all
gonna.
right. There's 6-0. It's good. It's good. 6-0.
I'm gonna
Braves,
Yeah.
offer.
they're on fire.
Hey,
Yeah. I mean, I'm kind of happy. I haven't been watching them, so maybe I should.
why are you engaging this, Jill? Get your voice off on a.
I don't watch it because they lose.
Get her
Oh,
off.
if they make it to the World Series, you better be watching.
Tim is saying, be quiet.
I am.
That-
All right.
Let's pray.
I'm
muting
bored.
Gracious God, we give you thanks for this time and this opportunity to share and fellowship and talk openly and, with one another. And more importantly, to share what's on our heart and the vision for how we can love you and love one another and love the world that you have so graciously created. And we ask your continued blessing on this group and those who are absent tonight, and for continued wisdom as we struggle with these difficult issues. No matter how much we think we have overcome these problems and faced them down, there's always more things that we can do and more challenges that present themselves. So we ask your strength and courage as we persevere. We pray all this in Christ's name. Amen.
Amen. Thanks, Tim.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
Thank you.
Tim.
Good night.
Bye.
Bye.
All right. Take care.